Red Bull have introduced what could be deemed as a very near illegal element to their new front suspension that they introduced 2 rounds ago at Spa in Belgium. And while the upgrade notes that Red Bull presented to the FIA for the Belgian Grand Prix a couple of weekends ago, it is in fact not necessarily the primary purpose of this upgrade. You see, within the purpose they stated, which is to revise the inboard fairings on the top wishbone, which would add more camber and thus therefore enhance the cooling with the new inlet on the side pod in tandem, that isn't what they were truly up to. Now let me explain. Now, fairings on front suspension were banned primarily to help reduce aerodynamic complexity as well as to overall improve the quality of racing by making it harder for teams to create highly sensitive aerodynamic packages which would easily disrupt the car behind. Thus, the rules were tightened up in terms of their wording, and the FIA thought no team would be able to introduce any elements of fairings on the front suspension. Of course, that isn't the case, and as we can see, it is not just Red Bull that have a lower fairing on their lower wishbone, but it's the same to be said of Mercedes. But where teams have not been able to introduce a fairing is the upper one. Well, that is until Red Bull's upgrade in Belgium. And it isn't even just the likes of VCarb, Haas and Aston Martin, the slower teams in the grid that haven't got this. It's even the big teams such as Mercedes, Ferrari and championship contenders McLaren. They themselves do not have this extreme level of attention to detail on their upper wishbones. And for good reason too, particularly if we consider how the current 2025 regulations sit with regards to fairings on suspension arms. To put it simply, they state that the suspension fairings must intersect the load line, with exceptions for steering lock at the front, be symmetrical with a longer major axis, have no dimension greater than 100 millimeters or 150 if this includes the drive shaft, have an aspect ratio no greater than that of 3.5 to 1, have an indifference between 10 degrees nose down and 0 degrees at the front. This goes up to 10 degrees nose up at the rear. So essentially this is a aerodynamicist's disaster. There is no camber, restrictions are placed across the profile thickness, and a limited window of angle adjustment is there to improve alignment and flow deflection. So the question that comes from this is, well, how exactly is Red Bull's front suspension fairings legal? And for that, we actually have to look back at another Red Bull car from earlier in their life cycle, the RB13. And of course, turn our focus to that particular car's front suspension. For the 2017 season, Red Bull's RB13 front lower wishbone shown above had fairings which were constructed to sit just within the limits of the law. Again, it's something we've seen on the now RB21. But how did they manage to do that? Well, the conjoined long chord section can be legally formed due to the previously mentioned rule which states that members sharing a common attachment point are virtually dissected into separate legs. So long as the individual members conform to the regulations, then it passes. I know that's a little bit difficult to understand potentially, but yeah, that is where it is. Now, that isn't really the interesting part of the RB13 that we need to pay attention to. We actually have to look further outboard to the junction with the brake ducts. The fairings take on a cambered upwashing profile, which is very much similar to the 2 flicks sitting above it. Not something that should conform given the regulations as they were back then and still kind of currently are. Aerodynamically, of course, the benefit of this would be to produce a little bit of a local downwash effect and also to give a little bit of circulation into the middle of the front tire wake. Again, a important area which you need to create outwash to minimize the negative effects of that. It is here that it may be argued that the profile here is required to avoid steering clashes, or perhaps to even in some cases, or in this case rather, to allow for the housing of tethers, brake lines or electrical cables, a minimal local exception. So for the new suspension fairings to pass the current regs as they are, the asymmetry is most likely introduced through the minimal exceptions local to the inboard junctions. That's the part that I made mention of earlier as one of the two possible reasons it is deemed legal. So in closing, Red Bull have definitely pushed the envelope of what is deemed legal and acceptable, but by doing so and having been successfully allowed to put this now upper wishbone fairing in place, it has of course definitely helped not only provide probably a little bit of local downforce in the surrounding area, but of course to just help with cleaning up the airflow in this area, in conjunction with that fairing on the lower wishbone, which has been in place for some time now. So again, this is just a case of Red Bull looking for the utmost levels of attention to detail to help kind of alleviate and solve the conundrums that are within their RB21. And of course, this is the sort of attention and level to detail teams need to have if they want to be championship winners and championship contenders. And of course, these are the sorts of things that I love about Formula One. Something I think I love to see, teams pushing the boundaries of what's technically allowed within a set of regulations. It's kind of what sets the great apart from just the good or the mediocrity. Of course, in Red Bull's case, it hasn't meant they're going to win a world championship or a driver's championship because they have a whole plethora of issues outside of that. But nonetheless, they haven't lost that touch of kind of innovation within their team to scope out these changes they can make within pushing the boundaries of these technical regs that we currently have, even in the final year of this regulation cycle. That's where I'm going to end the video, everyone. Hope you've all enjoyed it. If you have, do leave a like. If you're new here as well on F1 Unraveled, hit the subscribe button down below for all future F1 content. I'll catch you later.